Hi, hello, welcome back. It's me, Devraj. This is Mysticism in the Body, and I want to continue today looking at the great magical agent. This is the second video. I may yet do a third one. Let's see how far I manage to get with this time. So the great magical agent, also known as the astral light, it's one of these concepts that, it seems like incredibly useful. It is like believed to be, if you can get your hands on the great magical agent, then you can direct it to create in the world the kind of reality that you want. So, obviously to many people, this will be a very attractive idea. And yet, as these things often are, you start to research the great magical agent, the astral light, and you're told that it's everywhere. You're given these, bits of information that are just kind of annoying, and perhaps reinforce the sense that everything's being controlled by some kind of, group of people somewhere who know things. They're not telling little you down at the bottom of the pyramid how it works. They've somehow got their hands on the great magical agent and you haven't. And in a sense, I would say this is quite possibly true as well. In a sense, that is, because to my mind, there's nothing stopping anybody trying to find out more about the great magical agent. And what's important here is that act of trying to discover what the great magical agent actually is of itself important, is of itself revealing. But of course, as someone who's just like, say, a Westerner, just living in a country somewhere, we're brought up with this idea that we need to get the thing. Modern day consumer culture, we need to get the thing. Once we've got the thing, then it'll be cool. When we've got our new phone, it's cool. We can use our new phone. So we just need to get the great magical agent. Modern day capitalism makes the acquisitional process relatively straightforward, assuming you've got a bit of cash. Whereas when you look at esoteric concepts like this, and that acquisitional process is to do with understanding what it actually is from the various, kind of clues that are scattered around the place in the scene. So what I'm trying to say, maybe I'm being a bit long-winded, is, trying to understand the great magical agent is a super cool thing to do if you're interested in it. Last time we looked at this guy, Baphomet, somewhat controversial character, the Templars. Historically, the Knights Templar were meant to be sort of worshipping Baphomet, and that he's often regarded as something of a bad guy. Esoteric tarot decks, this one from Builders of the Adytum, tend to make an image of Baphomet and make him look pretty neg, like kind of so close to what the average Christian would consider to be the devil, and thus sort of get thee behind thee kind of thing. But in this image, he doesn't look quite so neg, assuming you don't have a major aversion to goats. He's got some symbols here on his belly. He's got Solve written here and he's pointing up. He's got Coagula written here and he's pointing down. And so the Solve, is kind of trying to get the astral light, the great magical agent, out of existing forms. And then the Coagula is projecting it into new forms. And what I talked a little bit about last time is how it's in the body. And that also the body is not so separate from the world around you. Not as much as, the cultures we live in would have you believe. Because, in your mind, it's only the early conditioning, around the age of 1 or 2, that makes these hard distinctions between self and other. And then from that early conditioning, that early formatting of our frontal lobes, we proceed into the world. So just as the astral light is bound up in the forms around us, whether they're in the natural world of plants and trees, or in the man-made world of buildings and bridges, it is also bound up in our own mind. Yet because of the way our culture has conditioned us, and I'm not saying that's a negative thing in any way, we place a much harder distinction between certain aspects of our mind and others. And when it comes to the Solve Coagula process and manifestation, that is not always very useful. And I think where the body really comes in here big time is because Essentially, we ourselves are forged by our culture, and in so doing, astral light is bound up into our bodies. So our natural energy is restrained by the cultural conditioning process. And what this means is that if you're willing to really dig into, with therapy or whatever, to really unbind some of this stuff from your body, then you can get your hands on it and you can start to work it. You can start to project it into new forms that you want. So as a human being, alive now on this planet, presumably you are, you have access to an awful lot of astral light, but you have to get your hands on it. And to do that, you have to dig. You have to dig into yourself so that you can get it to start to move, and then you have to learn how to project it. And explaining this process, it's like it also helps you to understand, modern day concepts, in the new age, like manifestation, or a little bit earlier on with, say, the builders of the Adytum, that I showed you that devil card just now, that was their work from like 100 years ago. They had this thing called New Thought, which was very popular in the States and I think bits of Europe for a while. And essentially what New Thought, or law of manifestation, this book, The Secret, what they tell you is that if you can create images of what you want and project them out, then they will manifest in your life. And essentially, it doesn't really work. But, to cut to the chase, and if you're if I said that like in 1998, I'd be stoned to death, because the manifestors were so hardcore in those days, and in the early 2000s. They had this book, you can't afford the luxury of another negative thought or something like that, that anyone introducing any negativity is hijacking the positive thrust of the culture. You're there, you're trying to project world peace from your frontal lobes with 1,000 other new agers. Someone comes in and says, no mate, it doesn't work. Then of course you need to get rid of that person, the negative thoughts. You can't have them around, But now, about 20 years further down the line, it's become clear that manifestation doesn't really work that well, or that, there's a lot about it that we don't understand. And I think what I've just been saying about the body and repression, how culture represses astral light into your body, is a big clue to understanding this. Many people generally in the esoteric scene have no grasp of energy. It's like that essentially the average person trying to do manifestation just doesn't have enough astral light accessible inside them. It's bound up in their muscles and fascia. They can't get their hands on it, so their attempts to manifest things just don't work. It's just not enough of it. It's like a kind of mechanical physics problem, And then they gather together with like thousands of other people, and try to manifest something, and it still doesn't work. Because if you can get your hands on enough of this, creating a kind of multi-distributor setup, doesn't work. You can have like 1,000 speakers operating at 1 decibel or something, and it doesn't necessarily come out at 1,000 decibels. So this is one, I think, probably the biggest issue with manifestation, relating to the astral light, and why New Thought itself, so popular for so long in the underground esoteric scene is now kind of dismissed, because it's not that it's wrong, but it's just not sufficiently complete an understanding to move forwards in a tangible way with. Classically, they say like chaos magicians, who are like secular magicians, not believing in God forms and this kind of thing. They're just trying to project realities out. But it's often said that they're all poor, that even though these people are constantly doing spells to bring money into their lives, they never seem to work. I don't know if anyone's done an exhaustive study on this, but it's popularly said around the fringes of the scene. And there may be a secondary problem as well with manifestation, with the whole New Thought concept, in that it may be affected by a kind of eon shift changeover. If you're familiar with some of my other ideas, the concept of subjectivity, modeling self as a little individual inside of you, of course that self has desires. So maybe at a time when that subjective presence was very strong, perhaps in the middle of the Piscean era, or like 1500, year 1500, something like that. You know, there was no challenge to this sense of an interior observer, experiencer of life, and so that little observer could push energy out, and it was easier. It had more inherent power behind it. But now that we're coming into the Aquarian era, where there's this huge distribution and this kind of every man and every woman is a star, every man and every woman is living in their own universe, then that no longer functions very well. Because there isn't enough energy in the subjective self anymore. It's under threat, it's collapsing with the eon changeover. And we can perhaps see the eon changeover as a kind of shift of stochastic pressure under the surface. You know, that there's this underlying, you know, it seems like it's random, but it's an underlying pressure that's shifting as we head further into the 21st century. And it's causing these old forms inside the mind to start to collapse, and then new forms will start to come up. And so a net result of this now is that, you know, this concept of manifestation from the egoic mind is just much less functional because of the shift in underlying stochastic pressure underneath the culture. Let's get back to Eliphas Levi. I don't want to get too far away. I'd just like to try and kind of explain my thoughts on some of these things in case they're useful to you. I mean, something super interesting to me that Eliphas Levi purportedly said, or that was reported by Paul Foster Case, who is the head of the founder of the Builders of the Adytum, was this line: "The astral light is the blind force each soul must conquer." Let's just stick that on, let's just put a written version of that up. The astral light is the blind force each soul must conquer. And when I first heard this line somewhere in the Builders of the Adytum coursework about a quarter century ago, it just jumped into my brain. As though it's like there's something here. You know, I didn't understand what it meant, but I just intuitively grasped that there was something very, very deep in this line. So let's start to take a little bit of a look at it. Let's take a look at it back through this devil card from Builders of the Adytum. What you'll see here that you don't see in the Eliphas Levi version are these two characters, one male, one female, who are chained to this kind of half cube, symbolic, upon which the figure of Baphomet is sitting. So presumably he's got them under control. They're like his little slaves. And what you notice here is, that these chains, they're not really that tight around their necks. They could probably take them off if they wish to, but they're clearly not doing it here. And another thing you can notice about these guys, they're kind of preening, they're kind of posturing a bit, hey? She's posturing a bit of her hands. He looks a bit like some kind of Roman temple boy or something, trying to look cool. And they've also, there are intimations that they themselves are a bit kind of goat-like, with the feet and the little horns and stuff like that. They're still rather part of the animal kingdom. They've got some tails as well. So the astral light is the blind force each soul must conquer. So this astral light here is being understood as a blind force, which means, I think, something that you don't see. Something that you don't see. But the inference with the phrase must conquer implies that you could see it. So that to me is talking about self-awareness. Something you don't know about yourself right now, but which you could, if you looked or investigated enough, could know about yourself. So right now there's a blind force that is chaining these people to the control of Baphomet. But if they could become aware of what's chaining them and how it's doing it, then they could be free of it. So this to me, it seems clear, is what is often known in, say, Buddhism, this kind of Eastern studies, as attachment or identification. Because we're attached to an idea or a way of being, or attached to certain possessions, or that we're, identified with being a certain type of person, we're in the grip of the astral light. Or rather, it's the astral light that we've allowed to grip us in this posture. These guys, they want to look cool. They want to look cool, and because they want to look cool, they're chained. They're chained to this thing. Perhaps they're, in their minds, from we're all primates, they want status. They want status. They want to be seen as being better than the people around them. And because this desire is kind of blind in them, they don't understand where it's coming from, they've become chained by it. So one aspect of the astral light is this chaining condition. That if we want to find the astral light, we have to do the unchaining. We have to disidentify. We have to not be so attached to the things that we're attached to. And in essence, what we have to do is go on a journey of self-discovery. We have to find out who we really are. We have to start to get self-awareness. We have to become interested. Why am I the way that I am? Why do I like certain things and not others? Why do I feel an aversion to certain situations and not others? Why are there things I really want to do, things I really don't want to do? And therefore, if I can dig into myself and develop enough self-awareness, I can take the chain off. So then the astral light is no longer a blind force. It's a force that I have control over, that I can get my hands on. So to me, that's what this key is saying, and that's also what this saying is saying. It's what it's implying. It's a blind force. Every word is useful. Each soul must conquer. So then, I'm doing my therapy, or I'm unbinding energy from my body with some breath work or bioenergetic practices or whatever. Then what do I do with it? That as I do those things, it breaks up this whole unconscious complexes that exist inside of me that have been put there because the cultural upbringing I had instrumentalized me for its needs. Cultures are like macroorganisms. I was brought up in Britain. So British culture imprinted itself upon me in the way I consider myself to be. And in so doing, it bound astral light into my body. Maybe you're brought up in the Middle East or America or Asia. The cultural conditioning is different, but in each case you're being instrumentalized towards the needs of the culture. And as that instrumentalization process takes place, you lose your agency in reality because your agency is bound up to your capacity to get hold of the astral light and thus manifest for yourself the life that you actually seek and want. And another aspect of this is, as you go on this inner journey, what you seek changes. These guys, let's see them again. They clearly want to be cool and they want status. They want everyone looking at them. But if they go on this journey of self-reflection, self-understanding, and they actually manage to take these chains off, their desires will be different. What they want to manifest will be different. So this is an important point as well. Because if we consider, I don't like using the word God because I don't believe in God, but if we consider that there's some underlying force that is animating and energizing forms, then when it allows an individual to create big amounts of change in their life or other people's lives, that person must be operating in alignment with its will. So they think they're just doing something for themselves, that's what their vision is, but it's actually coming from a deeper place. And so that creates a problem for people who want to manifest things but who are not so aligned, but have still got the chains around their neck. They are not free. And another, I should have looked it up to start with, but one of these sayings also from the builders of the Adytum, which was, I think, taken actually again, possibly from Eliphas Levi, the magician has the capacity to set himself free at his leisure. This could be herself. And this again is what it's talking to. If you can get the chains off, you're no longer controlled by this kind of underlying stochastic pressure that's going on underneath, that's elevating some people to project its agenda upon the world. You're free of that system. So this is really how I understand the astral light. In this situation, it's the blind force that's controlling. The blind force is controlling them. They're chained to this Baphomet guy who is the astral light, remember? He was Levi's personification of the astral light. Because of their unconsciousness and their lack of self-awareness, they're chained to him. But if they go on enough of a journey of self-discovery via whatever means, they become like this version of Baphomet. He doesn't have the chained up people anymore. They have become the very principle through which the universe naturally manifests the forms that it wants. Just to recapitulate a little bit more about the coagula, we talked about unbinding energy from existing forms, particularly through self-awareness, the solve. The coagula is like being able to, visualize in your mind's eye, whether with your eyes open or eyes closed, a situation that you want, maybe looking at it from different angles, and then projecting it into the world. Visualizing desired outcomes, trying to make it really, really clear and give that signal out. So when you get to a certain level of kind of adeptship or understanding, you can begin to do this because you've got your hands on enough of the great magical agent in order to create changes in your world. And because of the process that you've been through to get your hands on it, your desires are more purified. You're less likely to want things which will just be destructive for other people or chain them up. Okay, so another aspect of this, I think, this astral light stuff, I mentioned before the idea, it's very popular amongst increasing numbers of people. When I was young, back in the day, in the 90s, conspiracy theories were a big thing. I used to go and see David Icke, back in the 90s, a very powerful speaker, and he would talk about elite groups that are controlling everything using these magical principles. They've got the astral light and they're not letting other people have it, this kind of concept. They've got the control and the power and they're not letting other people have it. And I think it's important to understand here that there's nothing stopping you getting the astral light. There's nothing stopping you but your own mind, your own resistance, and your own fear of self-knowledge, of going on an inner journey. That's the only thing stopping you. So this whole kind of populist concept that you have nowadays, in the mid-2020s with Alex Jones or whoever, that, elite groups are controlling everything using these kind of techniques and they're keeping you down and they're blocking your own access, it's kind of half true, I think. It's kind of half true, but it's also very disempowering the way that he's presenting it. Because yes, I'm sure, if you study elite groups, they are doing these things, they do understand this stuff. And they understand just how weak, say, a lot of modern day science is, or that it's only really a tool, it's not really useful to understand the nature of reality. Science doesn't really do that because it's proceeding from certain kind of core formattings that have been given to the average citizen's brain. So I think the truth is that there almost certainly are elite groups doing all this kind of stuff with the astral light, but that fighting this politically, which is usually what it comes down to, because people don't want to do the work to get deep self-awareness, they just rely on politics and on democracy and on the idea that if you all rise up, then you're going to be able to take power back from these evil elite magicians. And in my opinion, that is just totally not going to work. And the only time that it might work is when anyway, there's some kind of, eon shift going on underneath, and anyway, reality is being reconfigured. So the only way that you can get yourself out of this whole complex of just esoteric stuff that's going on around you all the time is by getting the chains off yourself, getting your hands on your own astral light. That's the only way. Otherwise, you're just caught up in the system and you're just doing what the system wants. Okay, cool. I think that's enough on the astral light for now. I may be back with a Great Magical Agent Part 3. We'll see. Thank you so much for tuning in. This is me, Devraj, Mysticism in the Body, and I'll see you again shortly for some more content. Thank you.